All right, I next want to introduce the Honorable Kenneth M. Stoner, Oklahoma County District Judge. He was appointed to district judge, and he has gone through several series of elections without an opponent. So you are getting ready to start your ninth year? Sixth year. All right, sixth year. And he is handling the Oklahoma County Drug Court. He also handles a court that is the remerge court that we mentioned earlier today, that is the diversion program. And he was a longtime practicing criminal defense attorney. He got out of law school and started though as an assistant DA, is my recollection. And he is actually, I think, at least nationally renowned, maybe world renowned, but he has got a very great approach to, a very therapeutic approach to drug court. So let me introduce Judge Stoner.
So it's always best to start some remarks with some humor. And recently I had a chance to visit with a group called Leadership Oklahoma. It's a very politically, very influential group in Oklahoma. So it was very important that I was funny. And so I went to my wife, she's smarter and funnier than I am. I said, Barbara, I've got to have something funny to say for this group. And she said, well, honey, I think you should skip that. You're really not that funny. And I said, well, that is absolutely not true. People laugh at my jokes all the time. And she said, oh, bless your heart. You know, people just laugh because you're the judge, right? Just tell everybody your name is Judge Stoner. You're in charge of drug court. That's your joke. So anyway, there you go. A little bit about, let's see here. Forward. I preside over the Oklahoma County Treatment Court. That's drug DUI court. If you're live here in Oklahoma, most of our opinions about criminal justice in Oklahoma are kind of driven by the news from the county jail, because that's what we see over and over and over again. I'm here to tell you that's a very, very small part of what's happening in criminal justice in Oklahoma. We have in Oklahoma County lots of positive changes. Matter of fact, it's my opinion, I believe this, that years from now, 5, I don't know, 7, we'll have people from all over the United States be coming to Oklahoma City to see what we've done. With the emergence of TEAM, the emergence of Palomar, the emergence of Diversion Hub that's coming online, Oklahoma County Treatment Courts, what we're doing in mental health court and co-op court. There's some really exciting, and I would even argue innovative, creative stuff that's happening here. Oklahoma County Diversion Courts, we are in the top 1% in terms of largest size of treatment courts in the United States. There's over 3,000 treatment courts in the US, and one of the largest ones is here, right here. We serve a population called high risk. That does not mean they're dangerous. High risk is a term of art. That just means they are unlikely to be successful on normal probation. So they're high risk in that if you put them on a normal probation plan, they're likely not to do well. They're probably going to fail. They have a moderate to severe substance use disorder. And also on high risk, you also understand too, these are, whenever we talk about the way we interact with folks in the criminal justice, we do use incentives and sanctions to try to change behavior. A lot of times I'm talking to groups like, well, wait a minute, you take people that have an addiction and you use a jail sanction from time to time. Like we do it very strategically, very appropriately. And you also have to understand, because you hear it in public discourse a lot, well, really what we need is just more treatment. And we really do. But you also have to understand that people we have in treatment court do not go to treatment. They don't go to treatment. If they would go to treatment, they would have gone and gotten better the first 4 times they're on probation. These are people that they have failed probation, usually multiple times. They've been in prison once or twice and they're back again. These are the frequent flyers in our courthouse. But if we target a high risk population, that means they're not likely to be successful. But they also, one of the reasons they're not successful is because they have a moderate to severe substance use disorder. These are not rape, robberies, and murders. These are generally property crimes, public order offenses like DUI, things like that. But if we put them into a really structured environment, really rigorous accountability, but a lot of it's support and encouragement. They actually tend to do pretty well. Matter of fact, the national average from graduation from drug courts is about 60%. Oklahoma's average graduation rate is 67%. I'm happy to let you know, Oklahoma County, our graduation rate is 83%. We're one of the top in the nation in terms of the success of people in programs. So more than 4 out of 5 people that come in the program graduate. That means when they graduate, they get their charges dismissed and they kind of go into a life, hopefully, of recovery. It means they're employed. They've got a lot of stability factors that we need. As a judge, I'm very, very involved one-on-one with everybody in the program. You're very involved with the managing the kind of their accountability, giving them specific encouragement. That's part of what makes these treatment courts work, because you have someone in authority that's very engaged in their recovery, just like Judge Burton. You know, we go over what they're doing. And so I've personally been able to participate and seen thousands of people go through a moderate to severe addiction and see recovery, but I've also seen hundreds fail. So a lot of what I'm going to show you here today is actually some of the things that work, what doesn't work, and what I've kind of learned. I learned a lot from the literature, but I also learned a lot from work like a clinical practice in a way of those one-on-one interaction with this population. I did not make up drug courts. Drug courts are actually created by the National Drug Court Institute, the National Association of Drug Court Professionals, of which I'm a member of. They have different versions of treatment courts depending on the population. We've got Justice for Vets. That's basically a treatment court for people with prior military service. We have Judge Burton and I helped get that started here in Oklahoma County. She actually did all the heavy lifting on it to get it up off the ground. And we also have, there's another model called Tribal Healing and Wellness. It's a treatment court for people of Native heritage. We don't have one of these, but we do try to bring what we call culturally competence to interaction with the participants. But rewind the clock, 23 years ago, whenever I got out of law school, I wanted to be a prosecutor. Actually, I didn't actually go to school to be a prosecutor. When I went to school, I wanted to be a corporate lawyer and work in technology, but I got an internship at the DA's office, and it was absolutely fascinating. It was really interesting to work on cases that you'd open a newspaper, or you see on the news. I was working on that case and going to court, and you get a lot of experience very quickly. So I decided I'm going to go to work as an assistant DA. And I worked for a guy named Bob Macy. If you've been around Oklahoma, you know that story. Mr. Macy, and we really had this philosophy of what this was it's a process of the good guys versus the bad guys. And matter of fact, the way you increase public safety is you take the bad guys and you put them in jail. We're the good guys, those the bad guys. And matter of fact, I was very content with that. My belief was that the more people we put in prison, the safer we would be. And matter of fact, I would have been happy. I mean, my goal was to put as many people in prison that they were going to name a prison after me. That would have been okay with me too. And so I came from this perspective, really from a public safety perspective. I'm a big believer in public safety. But what I found was when I was in the DA's office, that the idea of what you think goes on at the courthouse is not what you see on television. When you see on television, you got that back room of a house, and the guy's got the map on the wall and little yarn strings, and I'm going to hit this target and I'm going to break in over here. That is not what you see. These are the vast majority of people, the crimes that we have are kind of marginal folks. And you notice very quickly that the majority of the cases, substance use, abuse, addiction is a relevant factor in the case. And it doesn't matter if it's a stolen car or if it's stolen property or what, you can tell underneath it really quickly, it's about the addiction or some other lifestyle factor they've got into. And you start also noticing too, that the folks that you're dealing with, their brother's in jail. And their mom is in jail, and their dad was in jail, and they kind of grew up in this system. It's not all of them, but a lot of them. You just see this kind of generational folks that are kind of wrapped in addiction, and they don't really always identify as law-abiding citizens. They're a little bit antisocial. I don't mean they have a personality disorder, but they just don't always follow conventional norms. But I went away, I left the courthouse, and I went and practiced corporate law for about 8 years. And there's something refreshing about leaving the courthouse. And when you come back, you kind of have fresh eyes on the situation. If you work in the business world, we're a little bit more precise about solving problems, using data, things like that. And we just noticed what we started noticing, because this is all during late 2012, 2015, somewhere in there, where we realized Oklahoma kind of woke up going, man, we've got a criminal justice problem here. What are we going to do? And you just notice that 75% of all the criminal cases in the courthouse, substance use, abuse, or addiction is a relevant factor in the case. Half of all of our divorce and child custody guardianships, substance use, abuse, addictions are relevant factors. We've got really good data. Every child that goes into DHS custody, one of the allegations that the home is unfit due to substance use, abuse, or addiction. Now, I'm not sure how many lawyers are in this room, but I can assure you, if anybody's lawyer, if you're a doctor in the medical profession, this may not surprise you. There are no classes on addiction in law school. There's no CLEs on addiction 10 years ago, 15 years ago. We just thought it was bad people doing bad stuff. As a matter of fact, so what you have is you have judges who have no training in addiction. And what you have is prosecutors, defense attorneys who have no training in addiction are the ones who are involved in crafting for solutions for people who are wrapped in addiction. And that's kind of that's how our system's been for a long time. And so, how can we start unwinding some of this and kind of get back? So Oklahoma's favorite son here, he says, it ain't what you don't know that gets you. It's what you know for sure that just ain't so. And what I discovered, is there's a lot of people that have a lot of really strong opinions about addiction, or have strong opinions about criminal justice and what we should be doing over here and someone should be doing over there. But they're wrong most of the time. Most of the time they're wrong. If you don't, there's a guy named Brian Stevenson. He's a lawyer, wrote a book called Just Mercy. He was made in a movie with Jamie Foxx, great film. He said, if you want to solve a problem, you got to get close to it. That kind of makes sense. You want to solve a problem, you get close to it. Everybody's got a lot of opinions what should happen down there, but they're not down there seeing eye to eye with the folks that are going through. So you got to get close to this problem and to really try to understand it. It really is time to think differently. Oklahoma, we do have crisis levels of incarceration. You guys have followed the news media on that. We're number one in America for incarceration rate for women. I think we dropped to number 2, then we're still like number 1 or 2. We're right up there in the top tier. There's been some changes recently that's dropped us just maybe a couple spots. But I looked at this a couple of weeks ago just to kind of get an idea where we're at, and to give you an idea. If we would let half of everyone go in prison, everybody that's in prison in Oklahoma, you let half of them go, we would still be ahead of 22 other states in the United States in terms of incarceration rate per capita. We could let half of people go and we would still be ahead of 22 other states. Now, so then that is a question, well, what's working? Does it work? Well, unfortunately, if you just take a close look at incarceration, tends to be inefficient and very expensive. And by the way, there are people that are very dangerous and predatory that do need to be in prison, but there's a lot of them that actually don't. If you have people that are low risk, prison tends to make low risk people a little bit worse. That kind of makes sense, I mean, like you and I, we don't know each other. You and I don't know each other, do we? But if I were to spend time getting to know the 5 people that you spend the most time with, I could probably know a lot about who you are. Well, somebody who's just been to prison, they've just spent a couple years hanging out with people that are a little bit more antisocial. They don't follow the rules, and they tend to become a little bit more like the people they just spent a lot of time with. So you actually have people coming out of prison that were low risk. They come out a little worse. Prison tends to be a graduate school for criminality for certain populations. It doesn't have a lot of effect on high risk people. It doesn't treat or cure addiction or mental illness. Most people will not argue with me when I say, well, if you're schizophrenic before you go to prison, you'll probably be just schizophrenic when you get out. Sure. If you're diabetic before you go to prison, you'll probably be diabetic when you get out. I'm just here to tell you, if you have an addiction before you go to prison, you will have the addiction when you get out. It doesn't treat that. And by the way, there are people that do get some treatment in there, but I just think treatment that's not community-based treatment tends to be a little bit like learning how to ride a bicycle in a classroom. You can learn some things, but really it's about living out in the world, the stresses of the world. That's when you tend to have the greatest results. 93% of people who go to prison will come back and live with us in our community. So there are some people that I just really want an efficient system. I'm okay. People, those that I want to say, there's some reasons to be, what do you call it, just selfishly wise, I mean, if you just want to live in a safe community, who do you want as your neighbor? We need to start paying close attention to this. If you come this from a moral perspective and medical professionals, I hope, how should we treat other human beings that are part of our community? It's also some good reasons to think about this differently. We've got a lot of biases, especially in the criminal justice system. A lot of people that have been in criminal justice have been there a long time. They're really not willing to look at why we do what we do. They get kind of stuck. I had a neuroscientist tell me that I got to go to one of those TED conferences, I met a neuroscientist. She said, we've actually learned more about the human brain in the last 10, 12 years than we have in all of human history combined. So if we're doing things like we were doing 20 years ago or 30 years ago, I think we're missing out, because addiction has to do with that 6 inch between our ears. There's a guy named Peter Thiel wrote a business book called 0 to 1. Peter Thiel, some of you might have heard him. He's a billionaire, Silicon Valley investor, Elon Musk's first partner in PayPal. He said, what we have a problem in technology is that you take an existing product and you add a few little things to it and you resell it. You take a product that's 6 and let's make it a 7 and we'll resell it. Take a product that's 10, add some features to it, make it a 12 and resell it. He said, what we need to do is go all the way back to first principle. Let's go back to 0, figure out what's our problem, what's our resources, and how do we rethink this from the ground up? And I think that's a great way to think about criminal justice. That's what I advocate for, is that we really need to do some 0 to 1 thinking about how do we reinvent our justice system. What's an addiction? That's probably a good place to start, just getting everybody to agree on what addiction is. This is ACLM's definition. Addiction is a treatable chronic medical disease involving complex interactions among brain circuits, genetics, the environment, individuals' life experiences. Prevention efforts and treatment approaches for addiction are generally as successful for those of chronic diseases. But for a definition that's a little bit this complex, you can see there's brain circuits, there's genetics, there's environments. It's layered and complex. I kind of like a simpler approach: compulsive use, loss of control, continued use despite harm and cravings. I kind of tend to dial in on that third one, continued use despite harm. If you're using and it's hurting you, and by the way, the person who's addicted is generally the least able to see the harm. They're generally, that's a hallmark feature of addiction. They don't always want to cure itself. They can't really see the harm. It is a spectrum disorder. That means kind of low harm, medium harm, high harm spectrum. So addiction's not just one thing. It's kind of a whole spectrum of, and I think maybe this, I use alcohol in here, but it's really you insert any drug really. But what is it? Even getting agreement on what addiction is. And by the way, if you're a medical professional, this is something you probably might be a little bit familiar with, but hopefully I can present it in a way that might be a fresh way of thinking about it. But some people think addiction is a physical dependence, or they think it's a lack of willpower. Or actually it's just bad people. Or is it a brain disease or a disorder? Well, on physical dependence, that's about tolerance withdrawal. That is something that would help. Every one of us in here would build tolerance. The more you use a substance, it takes more and more of the substance to get the same effect. When you quit using a substance and you go into withdrawal, that is all of us in here. If we were to have a hip replacement or knee surgery and you had a morphine drip, you're on it for a couple of weeks, every one of us in here would build tolerance, need more. And whenever they take you off of it, you would have some withdrawal symptoms. That's not what I'm talking about. That's not what I'm talking about. 85% of people take their medicine as prescribed. There's about 15% of us, if you say, well, you can use the morphine drip every, I don't know, once every hour, about 15% will not take it as directed. They're going to give themselves more if they're given the opportunity to. But there's about 3% of us, when you take them off that morphine drip, man, I got to go find more of that. I need to go find. That's the kind of addiction I'm talking about. Is it a lack of willpower? Most people recognize these famous alcoholics here. If you ever heard the story, these two gentlemen here on the left were addicted to stimulants. Fascinating story about JFK being addicted to stimulants. Say whatever you want to about these people's politics. No one's ever accused these people of being low on willpower. Is it a moral condition? A lot of people recognize, Freud, obviously the cigar. A lot of people don't know that he actually developed cancer in his mouth. He started using cocaine to dull the pain as an oral anesthesia. But he got himself addicted to morphine because he tried to get himself off of cocaine. He died addicted to morphine. Does anybody know Dr. Halstead? Dr. Halstead? Yeah. Okay. If you're a cancer, this guy is God to you. If you're a cancer surgeon, come modern father cancer surgery. One of the founders of Johns Hopkins University, also hopelessly addicted to cocaine, was famous for getting all of his colleagues addicted to cocaine. Eventually lost the appointment at Johns Hopkins, died addicted to cocaine. No one's ever accused these people of being bad people, immoral people. So if it's addiction, if it's not lack of dependence, willpower, behavior, is a brain disease or a disorder. And this is where I think it gets really fascinating to me, because you roll back the clock about 20 something years ago, 25 probably, this first ever study that addiction's a disease published in Science. At the time, based on about 20 years of research. But then along comes this guy, Mark Lewis, very well known, prominent, wrote a book, The Biology of Desire, Why Addiction is Not a Disease. What's that about? This is confusing. Well, so some of you in here might know what this is really about. These are academic nerds talking about how you should classify something. Is it a disease or disorder? His argument, essentially, probably a little bit of an oversimplification, is, well, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, those are more likely to be classified as disease, but since addiction can respond to incentives and sanctions, we should call it a disorder. There's not a single expert that says there's a lack of meaningful choice and it's best solved by compassionate treatment. So don't get dragged down that road here. One of my favorite drugs, and alcohol is a drug. This is how much Americans drink, by the way. It's broken down by 10% of our population. If you look at about a third of Americans don't drink at all. About a third of Americans drink a little bit. But you go in the top tier there, and we have about 10% of our population that drinks 70 free drinks a week. About 10 drinks a day. Okay. Now, so I like to ask the question, is alcohol addictive? Trick question. It certainly is for some people, but it's not for other people. There are a lot of people that can drink alcohol responsibly. Some people can't. Maybe that's not even the right question. Is alcohol addictive? Maybe the best question is what's different about that population. Maybe alcohol is not the problem. Alcohol is the solution to some other problem that they have. Maybe alcohol is not the disease, it's a symptom of an other underlying condition. And that's really where I think we have to focus our energy, because I do think we put way too much emphasis on the physical hooks in the compound, because you could swap out alcohol with opioids or whatever, but just throw gambling in there. Where's the chemical hook? And I tell you, they're just as big as junkies as somebody that's wrapped in addiction. Surgeon General, this 2016, first ever report on addiction. So we have 66 million Americans who binge drink. We have about 27 million Americans who use illicit drugs or they misuse their prescription drugs. I asked my legal assistant, how can we help illustrate this? And she said, well, how about we just put the American, this is every man, woman, and child, that's the entire population of essentially from Georgia to Idaho and up to, Washington. These people aren't addicted. These people are flirting with addiction. They're flirting with addiction. This, I think, is, in my view, the public health crisis of our time. I used to say that before COVID came along. Maybe I kind of knocked it out of the spot. But if you look at, those are people who are flirting with addiction. We do have about 20 million Americans that do actually meet the clinical definition of having a substance use disorder. Only about 10% get treatment. 20 million Americans, everybody from Louisiana to Idaho. This is a major problem. Past approaches to these issues have been rooted in misconceptions and prejudice. I think this is interesting. So now is the time to acknowledge these disorders must be addressed with compassion, sustainable, and treatable medical conditions. I will push back on this a little bit. If I'm talking to an old crusty sheriff, I'm like, hey, this is a medical condition, okay? But if we're talking to one of the professionals here, I'm going to push back a little bit on the medical condition because we actually do better in a treatment court, far better in a treatment court than if it was just treated as a medical condition, because we can actually, there's a lot of behavioral health interventions, a lot more time that we can spend and that are outside of what a traditional doctor would do. Addiction, I'll probably skip through this. It's essentially, I think, as an oversimplification, is a tug of war between kind of your very primitive brain, ventral tegmental area, nucleus accumbens, prefrontal cortex, the tug of war of the locus of control between these two parts of the brain. But if you have continued use despite harm, what is that? Not everybody that uses a drug's addicted. Not everybody drinks alcohol. Not everybody uses cocaine's addicted to it. But once you get to where it's causing an addiction, it's continues despite harm. What causes that? I want to submit to you, and I got this from Dr. Julio Rojas. You're going to have a combination of, you'll always find genetic factors, or you'll find people that are self-medicating symptoms of mental health, or they have high trauma, a lot of ACEs, a lot of adverse child experiences, basically PTSD for kids, a lot of cortisol in their body for decades while they're growing up. Or you're going to find somebody started using it at a very early age. This is really kind of, when you're thinking about learned behavior, it was learned usually starting out 13, 14, 15 years old. You will always find at least one, if not a combination of all those. Genetics do not cause addiction. Genetics create a susceptibility to addiction. So I think that's important. Risk of addiction accounts for about 50%. I had a board, someone's board certified addiction medicine tell me it's actually more hereditary than breast cancer in terms of susceptibility. That means it spikes their dopamine more quickly and higher than the average person, anchoring addiction. High adverse childhood experiences. So you've got a child that was exposed to a lot of parental substance abuse, suicide or death, crime, domestic violence, sexual abuse, emotional abuse of the child. So you basically got a child whose brain was bathed in cortisol for a decade, which created disrupted neurological development, social, emotional, and cognitive impairment, and adoption of high-risk behaviors such as eating unhealthy foods, smoking cigarettes, and using substances to self-soothe. If you start drinking at the age of 15, 40% of kids become alcoholics. You wait till 21, 7%. What's going on there? You know this. Synaptic pruning. If you never learn how to use impulse control, you don't need it anymore. It's pruned off. If you don't ever learn how to manage your emotions, you don't need that. It gets pruned off. And so you got, of course, the process of elimination. You get this, high speed connections between those habits that started at a very early age. So this is actually brain development for at adolescence. So you can see, if you introduce a mood-altering substance during a time when the brain is developing, it tends to hardwire the brain in that direction. So this is where I think it's really important. There's a Venn diagram. People say, well, Judge, listen, I know I got people, families got a lot of trauma. They're not addicts. I know people, everybody in their family is addicts, but they're not. Well, that's fine. Not everybody that has a lot of trauma becomes an addict. Not everybody has genetics becomes addicted. Not everybody that has mental illness becomes addiction. But if you're looking at addiction, continue to fight harm underneath that, move it around, you'll always will find untreated mental illness, genetic factors, early use, trauma. I don't know anybody that choose to have trauma. I don't know anybody that choose to have mental illness. No one chooses their genetics, and God help us if we start blaming people for their worst decisions when they were 13. So this is where we have to start being a lot more compassionate and have a little bit of moral humility around people with addiction, because that's what's going on underneath that. That's why you'll see that one group in there that drinks 70 drinks a week. They're involved in self-soothing. So that's why I think it's important we have a criminal justice system that understands what's really going on here. One thing to kind of clarify, how are we doing on time? 2 minutes? Okay. People that get sober, that is not the same thing as being in recovery. Being in recovery is really a voluntarily maintained sobriety. It involves increasing your physical health, mental health, social well-being, sense of citizenship, giving back, improve quality of life. Addiction and recovery is a systems issue. It's not just one thing. help someone get sober, they gotta have safe, stable, sober housing. They need healthy relationships, positive peer associations. You go back to what you know, that's what you'll stay with. Crucial physical health, meaningful work, having a sense of citizenship, learning how to have sober fun, healthy habits, mood regulation. So I was thinking about this being stuck in I-40 on a traffic jam. Everybody been stuck in I-40 on a traffic jam? Okay, think about if you're this person with a substance use disorder and the car that's in front of you is a substance, that's the methamphetamine. The car in front of you is the heroin, it's the alcohol. Well, guess what? The car and the substance can't get out of the way until the car in front of that can move, until the car in front of that can move, until the car. So you got to look at addiction holistically, look at it from a big picture. And how do you get this traffic jam flowing? How do you help someone find meaning and purpose, get some job training and healthy relationships? And if you can get this traffic jam flowing, then the substance gets out of the way. We tend to put way too much emphasis on, well, the problem you got is your meth. If you just put meth, it'd be over with. Well, sure, if it was that easy, it'd done a long time ago. You got to look at holistically. And that's what we do in a treatment court setting, 18 to 36 months. The lawyers, the therapist, probation officer, the judge, we really focus on problem solving. Like, what does everyone's traffic jam look like? How do we get the traffic moving in the right direction? We use encouragement, support, incentives for desired behavior. We use sanctions to correct behavior, not to punish people. Sanctions could be anything from sitting in court, watching court, writing a paper, a day of community service, 2 days of community service, 3 days of community service, a day in jail, 2 days in jail, 5 days in jail. It depends on where they're at and what they're capable of doing. We do proximal and distal analysis to figure out what they're capable of doing and try to correct behavior by implementing sanctions. And so a little bit about treatment courts. If you have a treatment court in your community, this is the results of a meta study. If you got a treatment court in your community, the average crime reduction is about 10%. So every dollar invested in drug court gets about a $4 return on investment. I don't know anybody here get a 400% return on their IRA. This is actually a couple years old. Terry White gave this to me. The slide. You know, it costs about $20,000 a year to incarcerate somebody. It costs about $5,000 a year to treat them at a treatment court. This is what I call a one-question IQ test. What should we be doing more of? Anyway, treatment courts, they do work. People can and do change. It is normal to change. It's not just possible, it's probable and predictable if you have the right amount of support, encouragement, and accountability. I'm going to close with this, man. I learned over time, it's really not the good guys versus the bad guys. It's just us. This is our community. How we treat people in our community, man, it makes us, it makes our community stronger if we treat people the right way and give them the right amount of support and encouragement. They do get better. So anyway, thank you all for having me.